It was one of the most deadly diseases in human history, a killer so powerful that it changed our world forever. An invisible enemy swept across the earth in the 1300s. It left behind millions of dead bodies, crying families, and cities full of fear. We call it the Black Death. This terrible plague killed between 50 to 60% of all people living in Europe between 1347 and 1353. That means out of every 10 people you knew, 5 or 6 of them died. Can you imagine watching half the people in your town disappear? For over 680 years, scientists, historians, and doctors have been asking one scary question. Where did this nightmare begin? What started this fire that burned across the entire world? The answer stayed hidden in darkness for centuries. It became one of history's biggest and most frightening mysteries. But now, in 2025, hasn't everything changed? Thanks to new DNA science, modern computers, and a team of brave scientists who never gave up, we finally know the truth. And the answer is more shocking than anyone ever imagined. The story does not begin in the crowded streets of London where bodies piled up in the streets. It does not start in the busy ports of Italy where ships brought death to shore. No, this story starts with something much simpler. A single piece of stone in the mountains of a faraway place. A gravestone with one word carved into it. A word that makes your blood run cold. Pestilence. In the hot summer of 1886, a group of Russian scientists were digging in the ground near a tiny village. The village was called Kyrgyzstan. It sat close to the beautiful Lake Issyk-Kul in what we now call Kyrgyzstan. These scientists were looking for clues about people who lived long ago. They found graves. Lots and lots of graves. These graves belonged to a small trading community. These were Christian people who lived and worked on the Silk Road. The Silk Road was like the Amazon delivery system of the ancient world. But instead of bringing packages, it brought something much worse. The scientists uncovered dozens of graves marked with stone. Each stone had a date carved into it. The dates said 1338 and 1339. Wait, did you catch that? That's almost 10 years before the Black Death arrived in Europe. This was a huge clue, but nobody knew it yet. On one of the gravestones, there was writing in an old language called Syriac. The words said, "This is the tomb of the believer Sanmak. He died of pestilence." That word again. Pestilence. Back in medieval times, people used this word when a disease was so horrible, so terrifying, that they couldn't even describe it properly. It was their way of saying, something really bad killed this person. The Russian scientists wrote down everything they found. They took the bones back to Russia. They stored them in a museum in St. Petersburg. And then, just like so many important discoveries, everything was forgotten. The bones sat in boxes for more than 100 years. Imagine that. The answer to one of history's greatest mysteries was sitting in a dusty museum. And nobody knew it. Fast forward to recent years. A smart historian named Philip Slavin was working at the University of Stirling in Scotland. He was studying old papers about the Black Death. He liked to look at economics and the environment. One day, he stumbled upon those old records from 1886, and something didn't look right. He started reading the field notes, the diaries, and looking at the old maps from the Russian expedition. Then he saw something that made his heart beat faster. Sanmak wasn't alone. Between 1338 and 1339, over 118 people from this tiny trading village had died. That's not normal, and that's not a regular flu or a normal illness. That's something absolutely terrible happening. Many of the tombstones said the same thing. Died of pestilence. For a small village, losing 118 people in just 2 years was a disaster. It was like the entire community almost disappeared. Philip Slavin became almost 100% sure that this was the beginning of the Black Death. But being sure wasn't enough, and he needed proof. The problem was simple but huge. How do you prove that people who died almost 700 years ago had a specific disease? You can't just ask them how they felt. Right? Slavin couldn't travel back in time. He needed something better. He needed DNA. He needed science. But he was just a historian. He needed to find scientists who could help him unlock this 700-year-old secret. This is where our story gets really exciting. Enter the super scientists. At the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Germany, there was a team of scientists called paleogeneticists. These are people who study really old DNA. When they heard Philip Slavin talk about his findings, their reaction was immediate and powerful. They literally said, "This could be it. This could be where everything started." You see, this team had already been hunting for the plague's origin for years. They were like detectives. But instead of looking for fingerprints, they were looking for DNA fingerprints. They had collected and studied DNA from over 2,300 samples. These samples came from modern rats, ancient human skeletons, and plague victims from all around the world. They were building a family tree. But not for humans, for a killer bacteria. And what they discovered was mind-blowing. In the early 1300s, the plague bacteria did something crazy. It exploded into 4 new types all at once. Scientists call this a Big Bang event. It's like when fireworks explode into many colors at the same time. One of these 4 new types was the exact strain that caused the Black Death in Europe. This was the mother of all the plagues that came after it for the next 400 years. But here's what puzzled the scientists. They knew this mother strain didn't start in Europe. Why? Because the plague strains they found in Black Death victims in Europe were already slightly different. They had 1 or 2 mutations. Think of it like a photocopy of a photocopy. The European plague was a copy, not the original. The true origin, the real mother strain, had to be somewhere else, but where? That's where the bones from Kyrgyzstan came into the picture. A collaboration began. Philip Slavin teamed up with Russian researchers at the Peter the Great Museum. This is where those old skulls from 1886 had been sitting in storage for over a century. The team got permission to extract DNA from the teeth of 7 individuals. Why teeth? Because teeth are like time capsules. The inside of a tooth has something called dental pulp. This pulp contains dried blood vessels, and blood can carry diseases. So even after 700 years, if someone died from a disease in their blood, their teeth might still have traces of it. It's like finding a message in a bottle, except the bottle is a tooth. And the message is written in DNA. The results were absolutely breathtaking. In the DNA from 3 of the 7 people, they found it. The unmistakable genetic signature of Yersinia pestis. That's the scientific name for the plague bacteria. The pestilence of 1338 was indeed the plague. Philip Slavin's hunch was right. He must have been jumping with joy. But even more stunning was what came next. After the scientists read the complete genome of the ancient bacteria, they compared it to their global family tree of plague strains, and what they found changed everything we thought we knew about history. The strain from the 1338 Kyrgyzstan victims wasn't just any plague strain, it was the ancestral strain. It sat at the exact center point of that Big Bang event. It was the mother of them all. The Adam and Eve of the plague. They had found ground zero. They had found the birthplace of the Black Death. Think about what this means. Every single plague outbreak in Europe for the next 400 years, every death in London, Paris, Italy, everywhere. All of it traced back to this one tiny village in the mountains of Kyrgyzstan in the year 1338. With the time and place finally confirmed, scientists asked the next big question. How? How did this bacteria suddenly jump from animals into humans with such deadly power? This process has a scientific name: zoonotic spillover. That's when a disease jumps from animals to people. The area around Lake Issyk-Kul in the Tian Shan mountains is what scientists call a natural plague reservoir. This means the plague bacteria lives there naturally all the time. It lives inside wild rodents like marmots, gerbils, and voles. These cute-looking animals were actually carrying a deadly secret. The researchers think that the weather suddenly changed. Maybe the spring became warmer and wetter than usual. This made plants grow more. More plants meant more food. More food meant the rodent population exploded. More rodents meant more fleas. And those fleas were carrying the plague bacteria. This crowded, busy ecosystem created what scientists call a perfect storm. The bacteria had more chances to jump to a new host. And that new host was humans. Maybe a hunter caught a marmot for its meat or fur. Maybe someone touched an infected animal. One tiny moment, one small contact, and everything changed forever. But here's the final question that needed answering. How did this disease travel 3,500 kilometers from a quiet mountain village to the busy ports of the Black Sea? How did it cross deserts, mountains, and countries to reach Europe? The graves themselves gave scientists the final clues. Philip Slavin looked very carefully at what was buried with the people. Many graves contained treasures from far-off lands. There were pearls from the Indian Ocean. There were coins from Iran. There were beautiful objects from the Mediterranean. These weren't poor farmers. These were traders. These people were part of the famous Silk Road network. The Silk Road connected China to Europe. It was like the internet of the ancient world, but for goods and ideas. These traders traveled in camel caravans. They carried silk, spices, gold, and other valuable goods. But they also carried something they didn't know about. Something invisible. Something deadly. Hidden in the cargo were black rats. On those rats were fleas. And in those fleas was the plague bacteria. The caravans became moving death traps. They carried the plague from one settlement to the next. It was a slow, invisible march of death across Central Asia. Eventually, this deadly chain reaction reached the Crimean Peninsula. It arrived at a port city called Kaffa in 1346. What happened there is one of the most horrible stories in history. The Mongol army was attacking the city. Many of their soldiers got sick with the plague and died. So what did they do? They used giant catapults to throw the dead bodies over the city walls. This was one of the first known examples of biological warfare. They weaponized death itself. From Kaffa, the plague spread like wildfire. Italian trading ships left the port. They were sailing home to Europe, but they carried infected rats and fleas with them. When these ships reached Europe, they brought the Black Death with them. Europe didn't stand a chance. Europe was especially vulnerable. Why? Because there had been a huge explosion in the rat population. Medieval cities were crowded and dirty. They didn't have good sanitation. Garbage piled up in the streets. For rats, it was paradise. For humans, it became a nightmare. The Black Death ripped through Europe with terrifying speed. In some cities, half of all people died. In Paris, 50,000 people out of 100,000 died. In Florence, Italy, the population dropped from 100 to 20,000 to just 50,000. Imagine your city losing half its people in just a few years. Families were destroyed. Parents watched their children die. Children became orphans. Bodies piled up so fast that people couldn't bury them properly. The smell of death filled the air. Some villages were completely abandoned. It was like something from a horror movie. Except it was real. This discovery in 2022 and the ongoing research through 2025 has transformed our understanding of history. A forgotten cemetery in Kyrgyzstan is now known as the epicenter of humanity's darkest chapter. It reveals how one microscopic bacterium, born in the rugged mountains of Central Asia, altered the course of human civilization. Thanks to modern science, we can now tell this story with certainty. We know exactly when it started, 1338. We know exactly where it started, near Lake Issyk-Kul in Kyrgyzstan. We know how it started, from rodents to humans through fleas, and we know how it spread, through trade routes carried by rats. Every piece of the 700-year-old puzzle has finally been solved. But this story teaches us something important about today. Diseases can still jump from animals to humans. Climate change can still create conditions for outbreaks, and global travel can still spread diseases quickly around the world. The Black Death isn't just ancient history. It's a warning for our future. Scientists continue to study these ancient bones. They're learning more every year. New technologies are helping them understand things that were impossible to know before. Who knows what other secrets these 700-year-old graves might still reveal? Thanks for watching this incredible journey through time. If you enjoyed discovering how scientists solved one of history's greatest mysteries, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. There are so many more amazing discoveries waiting to be explored. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep wondering about the mysteries of our world.